In 1996, Nintendo would release one of the most acclaimed video games of all time, Super Mario 64. This landmark title on Nintendo's newest console would go on to forever change the landscape of gaming and set the rules on how 3D platformers are made to this day. One other major event would define 1996. That is the year I asked my parents for an N64 for my birthday, and instead, I received a Thomas the Tank Engine book bag. Thus, growing up, my exposure to games was limited to whatever my older cousin Stu didn't feel like playing anymore. So I cherished the blatant Sonic clones, Speedy Gonzales, Los Gatos Bandidos, and I clocked dummy hours into Power Pigs of the Dark Age. But when Stu got himself an N64 and I inherited his SNES games that didn't belong in a landfill, I would be introduced to the underrated treasure that is Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars was an incredibly unique game which did away with many conventions established by both RPGs and Mario titles before it. When I first decided to pop that particular game into my Super NES, I didn't quite know what to expect, but I had vague aspirations of eating mushrooms, curb stomping turtles, and saving the princess. So when after the intro cutscene, instead of this, I was greeted with this, my young, impressionable, approximately 13-watt mind was blown.
What? This is 3D!
Is this the future?
I can see the back of Mario's head. Look how fresh it looks!
Until that point, the isometric perspective had rarely been used in video games, and no game ever combined it with the freedom of movement that's expected of a Mario title. So to many people at the time, myself included, this was Mario's true first adventure in a 3D world. And more importantly, Square used this fleshed out new dimension to make Mario's world feel alive in a way that it never had before. No longer were the levels just pretty backdrops for Mario's platforming antics. Instead of just being random points on an overworld map, they felt like real places in a rational, interconnected world. Oh, of course Mario would live next door to the Mushroom Kingdom, and of course the kingdom would have a sewer system right below it. And of course, when you get flushed out of the pipes, you get spat into a lake downstream. In the modern era of gaming, this doesn't really sound like rocket surgery, but realize that even today's Mario titles don't actually manage to accomplish this. Both Mario Galaxies and Mario Odyssey have beautifully realized individual levels, but they all exist in a vacuum from all the other levels within each game. Mario flying across the game's universes to access new worlds is just a glorified version of Super Mario World's overworld map. They lack the sense of cohesion and overarching theme that Mario RPG had achieved decades prior. In addition to its world being wonderfully designed, Mario RPG breathed life into that world through its interesting and highly unique characters. It took many of the heroes and villains we already loved from previous Mario games, fleshed them out, and showed off their personalities. Mario, the typically silent protagonist, is now hilariously expressive. His communication through charades play out like a slapstick episode of Lassie.
What's that, Mario? Bowser and Toadstool are having a tea party? And I'm invited?
As a result, this marked the first game where Mario feels like a relatable hero. Yoshi isn't just Mario's disposable pet dinosaur anymore. He lives on a tropical island with a bunch of his friends who race for cookies, and get bullied by original character Boshi. The aimless Koopa, Goomba, and Magic Koopa minions you've swatted in past games are now troops of a military brigade led by the nefarious Bowser. And speaking of Bowser, Mario RPG would be the first time that Prime Doodoo Head numero uno would be a playable character. And you find out that actually, he's a big softy wiener. Aside from the familiar franchise characters, Mario RPG also introduced newcomers who would become fan favorites in their own right. There's Mallow, the prince of a cloud kingdom with an identity crisis, Bellome, the giant Furby that lives in the sewers and eats everything and everyone, and who could forget Gino, the children's doll with gun arms who's possessed by the spirit of God, yet still can't get into the latest Smash game. The design of these characters was weird, funky, and yet it still managed to meld beautifully with the existing Mario inhabitants, which makes it such a shame that this was the only game we would get to see them in. Some of the clever character design flew under my radar for years, like the fact that many of the bosses are living weapons because they are created by boss bad guy Smithy, the evil blacksmith. There are actually tons of cool secrets like that peppered throughout the game. For instance, both Link and Samus make cameo appearances, marking the only time they would meet Mario in the same game until Super Smash Bros. For the N64. And how about the fact that you can transform into 8-bit Mario in part of Booster's Tower? Or that after a lengthy side quest, you can travel through Monstro Town to an alternate dimension and fight what can only be described as an anime demon version of the singer Prince. Now, although I'm still in awe to this day with Super Mario RPG's world and the characters that inhabit it, I wouldn't be making this video if the gameplay was a wet, sloppy fart. Luckily, this kinder egg of a game was hiding a delightful twist on traditional RPG game mechanics within its delicious exterior. Typical successful RPGs of the time, like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, were very formulaic and deviated little from the established gameplay of random encounters, top-down movement, and turn-based combat. While these mechanics were enough to tickle the collective pickles of many a gamer, others such as prepubescent Novoice found that style of gameplay frankly boring. When it came to Mario RPG, someone at Square must have realized that strictly traditional RPG mechanics would not be a great fit for a Mario game, so they made a few key changes. It wouldn't have felt like a true Mario game if Mario was constrained to just moving up, down, left, and right, so he was given full 8-way directional movement along with his iconic jump. This one design decision cascaded into numerous different changes that made traversing the game world feel so much more fun and interesting. No more annoying random encounters. Enemies were visibly on the map, and you now had the choice to either engage them or use Mario's incredible platforming abilities to avoid them. Levels, puzzles, and secrets were also designed with verticality in mind, making the world much more enticing to explore. Another small change Square made that had a huge impact was the addition of the timed hits system. During combat, pressing a button with the correct timing would either make your attack do more damage or help boost your defense. This was brilliantly intuitive since this is already what we did in other games, even when it had no effect. And holy guacamole, did this change take the boring limp wrist ping pong slap battles that most RPG games called their combat systems and turn it into something that was actually skill-based and engaging. Every attack had a different timing or set of inputs to learn, meaning that not only would your characters level up in-game, but as you put more time in and learn the moves, you, the player, became a more efficient fighter. This shift in focus towards a more involved style of combat led to a greater sense of immersion in the game. Instead of just giving your party their orders during a battle, it felt like you were the one slapping that stupid smiley fish upside the head with your trusty combat symbols. This greater sense of connection to the action made it no coincidence that Mario RPG was the first RPG that actually engaged me as a kid, and I know I'm not alone. Despite being one of the lesser known and more obscure Mario titles, Super Mario RPG's influence can still be seen all over gaming today. Although Square and Nintendo would never collaborate to create a direct sequel, Super Mario RPG was directly responsible for the creation of the Paper Mario series, and eventually the Mario and Luigi series as well. The game's unique mechanics of more involved combat and enemies visible on the overworld have become mainstays of many modern RPGs. And whether you know it or not, there's an extremely good chance you've encountered pieces of Super Mario RPG in the wilds of the internet. Its iconic soundtrack has been used in innumerable YouTube videos. Its cult following has taken to every forum in existence to demand its characters be added to the new Super Smash Bros. And Donkey has even made an entire video based on a render of a character that was cut from the final version of the game. It really is difficult to overstate how far-reaching Super Mario RPG's impact has been. In the years since its release, Mario RPG has been recognized time and time again as an absolute gem of a game, earning spots on best of lists alongside the likes of Xenoblade Chronicles, Dark Souls, and Chrono Trigger. It would also go on to receive re-releases on both the Wii and Wii U Virtual Console, and see inclusion as one of the titles on the SNES Mini. If you never had the chance before, there's so many ways you can play and enjoy this game today. Super Mario RPG was a major part of my story of falling in love with video games, and because of that, it'll always hold a special place in my heart. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.